Finally, like many countries over the course of the 20th century, France intentionally flooded entire valleys to build hydroelectric dams. Dozens of villages were completely submerged and their inhabitants displaced. In 2015, artist and geo-sonographer Carolina E. Santo walked over 600 kilometers between two of those drowned villages. She documented the experience in a new book. Its title translates to Murmurs of Drowned Villages, and she joins us on the program now to talk about it. Carolina, thank you so much for speaking with us. Can you just start by telling us how you became interested in the stories of these villages?
Yes, of course. Well, first of all, hello. Thank you for having me. And well, I became interested in these stories as I was doing my doctoral research in sonography at the University of Vienna. And my research was focused on development, forced displacement, and resettlement. And by this, I mean any type of development project that forces people to move away from their homes and to resettle elsewhere. And it was in that context that I met anthropologist Armelle Faure in 2013. And Armelle had been collecting interviews from people who had witnessed or who had experienced the forced displacement and resettlement of the Dordogne Valley. The Dordogne Valley is a place where 5 large dams were built right after Second World War until the 60s, let's say between 45 and the 60s, displacing hundreds of families and forcing them to resettle elsewhere. So Noznac is one of those villages from the Dordogne Valley, and Ubaye was a village in the Alps of Haute-Provence, 6 kilometers away from there, who had been through the same process of development of forced displacement due to the construction of the Serre-Ponçon Dam.
So tell us, where did the idea then to do this walk between those two villages come from?
Well, actually, I was struck by a coincidence between these two villages that are, as I said, separated by 600 kilometers, and I wanted to connect to them in some way, but I didn't know how. And the coincidence is that historically both villages had a celebration dedicated to their saint patroness, which is Saint Mary Magdalene. And every year on the 22nd of July, both villages had this celebration when the villages existed. But when the villages were submerged, the displaced inhabitants from both villages found ways to continue this celebration. And both communities had a special place built on top of the reservoir. And every year they still congregate on the same day, which is the 22nd of July, on that spot, which is as close as possible to their submerged village. So in fact, I realized that these displaced communities were gathering on the same day for the same reasons, and that they didn't specifically know each other. So I really wanted to connect them in some way. And the idea of walking was certainly inspired by demonstration walks, but also by art performances that involve walking, I'd say.
And tell us more about your process, because as you were walking, you were also listening to these recorded interviews with the people who used to live in these villages.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. Armelle Faure, the anthropologist, had been conducting interviews in the Dordogne Valley since 2010. And she had gathered a very dense and very interesting material. So she has interviewed over 100 witnesses from that period. And this became an archive, the oral archives of the valley, of the Dordogne Valley, that were realized by Armelle Faure. They were supported by the Archives départementales du Cantal et Archives départementales de la Corrèze, with the help of EDF, Électricité de France. And so I wanted to find a way to listen to this very dense material. And for me, walking was the best possible way to do it. And it was also, walking was also a way to embody my research, because I had been working on this material for long years. So it was a way to get away from the table and feel the body going through the research material in some way. Mm-hmm.
And at the end of your pilgrimage, you actually brought these audio recordings to the people who used to live in these villages. Like you said, you were bringing these two populations of people together. How did they react to your project?
Well, I did. While I was walking and listening to these stories, I was also writing down the extracts that I found interesting. And when I arrived in Ubay, I gifted. It was a gift. This was the performance that I made on the 22nd of July in Ubay. And they were, I think they were touched, but the reactions were very different. Some were very touched, some were irritated as well. And some people were moved and others were very happy. So it was very...
Yeah, in a way you restored a sort of...
It was a very interesting experience.
In a way, you restored a sort of collective memory to its an original place. Do you believe that memory needs a sort of theatrical performance to be able to be kept alive?
Well, yeah, well, I would say that theater is a kind of a memory machine. And Robert Carson, who's a performance scholar and professor, wrote this wonderful book that's called Theater of Ghosts, I think. I don't know if this answers your question, but let me say that I think that memory needs to be activated, whether through theater or literature, painting, or any kind of art. But I mean, also in a conversation or a meditation. And walking is a very good way to reactivate memory. Because memory needs to be active and creative. This is important for me. It's important to avoid nostalgia and to work on memory as an active and creative potentiality.
No, I love that idea of making memory active.
If I've answered your...
No, absolutely. And finally, you describe yourself as an artist and a geo sonographer, a concept that you came up with. Can you just briefly explain to us what that is exactly?
Yes, I'll try to. Well, geosonography is a word that I came up with to make sense of how I envisage a theater and sonography outside of the traditional proscenium stage of the theater building, let's say. So I became interested in looking at the world outside of the theater through the lens of sonography, and the complexity of the stories I was trying to make sense through this lens and through my discipline was at some point too overwhelming. And this is when I came across Deleuze and Guattari's geophilosophy, who propose a philosophy that is connected to the earth and to the territory. And this was very mind-blowing for me, because it means that the philosopher is not overlooking at the world to think about it, but he's in fact living in the world in a more grounded and connected, in a more grounded and connected way. So the connection is made with humans and all living creatures in the world. And this has immensely inspired me. And I thought that I would try to become a geosonographer inspired by this philosophy.
Oh, it's such a lovely and powerful idea.
Research.
Carolina, thank you so much. We're going to have to leave it there, but thank you for sharing all of these wonderful food for thought with us today. Carolina y Santo, a geo sonographer, our prospective guest today.